The delegation from Thornfield Pack arrived at dawn. They needed the Alpha King's help. Their systems were collapsing, food shortages, border disputes, infrastructure failing. Donovan Ironwood agreed to meet them. When they walked into the council chamber, they saw her first, standing beside the throne, wearing Luna markings. Marcella. The woman Chayton had rejected 6 months ago. The one he'd replaced with Beatrice, the one who'd walked into a blizzard and disappeared. She was alive, and she was the Alpha King's Luna. Chayton went white. Beatrice, standing beside him, froze. Marcella looked at them. No anger, no satisfaction, just calm. "You have 10 minutes to state your case," she said quietly. They'd come begging for help from the woman they threw away.
If you're here because you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or replaced by someone who didn't earn it, this story is for you. We don't do weak endings here. We do evolution. So if that sounds like your kind of story, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
The morning mist hung low over the Thornfield Pack's territory when Marcella stepped out of the administrative hall, a stack of inventory reports tucked against her ribs. The pack was already moving. Warriors ran drills in the eastern courtyard, their footfalls rhythmic against packed dirt. A group of younger wolves hauled firewood toward the communal kitchens, laughing about something Marcella couldn't quite hear. She walked through it all with her shoulders square, her stride even. "Morning, Marcella," called one of the supply coordinators, a middle-aged wolf named Garrett who always smelled faintly of leather and pine resin. "Morning," she replied, shifting the reports to one arm. "Did the grain shipment arrive?" "Yesterday evening. Counted and stored." "Good." She kept walking. Pack members nodded as she passed. Some greeted her by name. Others just stepped aside with quiet respect. Marcella had been managing logistics for the Thornfield Pack since she turned 19. Resource allocation, dispute mediation, council preparation. The kind of work that kept a pack running but rarely got noticed unless something went wrong. She didn't mind. Or at least she told herself she didn't. By the time she reached the council hall, the sun had burned through the mist. Inside, the room smelled like old wood and candle wax. 3 elders were already seated at the long table, reviewing documents. Marcella set her reports down and began organizing them by category. "Marcella," Elder Corwin said, glancing up. His hair was more silver than black now, but his eyes were sharp. "The border negotiation is today, correct?"
"Yes."
"The Ironwood delegation arrives at midday." "And you've prepared the terms?" "Reviewed, revised, and ready for presentation." Corwin nodded.
"Good."
"Chayton should be here soon." Marcella's hands stilled for half a second. Then she kept sorting. "Chayton, her mate."
"Well, technically."
The bond had formed 2 years ago during a full moon ceremony. It wasn't the kind of thing you chose. The moon goddess decided which wolves fit together, and when the bond snapped into place, you felt it.
A pull.
A recognition. Like your soul had been waiting for someone and finally found them. Marcella had felt it. She just wasn't sure Chayton had. Here's something most people don't understand about mate bonds. They're not automatic love. They're potential. A connection that grows stronger the more you invest in it. Some wolves fall hard the moment the bond forms. Others take time. Chayton had taken a lot of time.
2 years, in fact.
And he still looked at her like she was useful, not cherished. "Marcella." She blinked. Elder Corwin was watching her.
"Sorry."
"Yes. I asked if you wanted to lead the negotiation today." She hesitated. "I thought Chayton." "Chayton will be there," Corwin said, waving a hand. "But you know the terms better than anyone. You should present." Marcella glanced at the other elders. Both nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll lead." The memory hit her without warning as she stood there, hands resting on the edge of the table. She was 16 again, standing in front of 2 freshly dug graves with dirt still clinging to the shovels nearby. Her parents, killed during a border skirmish with a rival pack. Marcella remembered the cold, the way her fingers had gone numb even though it was summer, the way her chest felt too tight to breathe. She'd been trying so hard not to cry in front of everyone. Then someone had stepped up beside her. Chayton. He was 18 then, already broad-shouldered and calm in a way that made people listen when he spoke. The future alpha. "You're Marcella, right?" he'd asked. She'd nodded, throat too tight to answer. Chayton had looked at the graves, then back at her. His voice had been steady.
Kind.
"Your parents were brave," he'd said. "And this pack takes care of its own. You're not alone here." It was the first time anyone had said something that didn't feel empty. Marcella had held onto those words for years. She'd studied harder than anyone else, trained with the warriors even when she didn't have to, learned negotiation, strategy, resource management, anything that could make her useful to the pack, useful to him, because she believed that one day, when Chayton led the pack, she'd stand beside him as someone he could rely on, someone he could be proud of. She still believed it, most days. The Ironwood delegation arrived just after noon. Marcella stood near the center of the council chamber as they entered. 3 wolves. The lead negotiator was a woman named Kara, sharp-eyed and efficient. Behind her stood 2 advisors, both carrying leather-bound ledgers. Chayton entered a moment later.
Tall.
Dark-haired, moving with the kind of easy authority that came from knowing people would follow him. He didn't look at Marcella, just took his seat at the head of the table. Marcella forced herself to focus. "Thank you for meeting with us," she began, voice steady. "We're here to discuss shared access to the northern hunting grounds." Kara nodded. "Our pack has been using the eastern edge of that territory for the past decade. We'd like to formalize the arrangement." "Understood," Marcella said. She pulled out a map and laid it flat on the table. "The issue is that the northern grounds fall within Thornfield's ancestral claim. However, we recognize that rigid territorial boundaries can cause unnecessary conflict." One of the Ironwood advisors leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" "Shared access," Marcella said, "but with structured patrol rotations. If both packs commit warriors to securing the area, then both packs benefit from the resources." Kara studied the map. "How many patrol shifts?" 2 per week from each side. Rotating schedules to avoid overlap. There was a pause. Then Kara nodded. "That's fair." Elder Corwin smiled. One of the other elders murmured approval. Chayton said nothing. Marcella kept talking, walking them through logistics, rotation schedules, and dispute resolution protocols. The kind of details that most alphas found boring, but were critical to making agreements actually work. By the end of the meeting, both sides had signed. Kara stood, extending a hand toward Marcella. "Well negotiated. Thank you." The Ironwood delegation left. Elder Corwin clapped Marcella on the shoulder. "Excellent work." "Thank you, Elder." She started gathering the documents. "Marcella." Chayton's voice. She turned. He was still seated, one arm draped over the back of his chair. His expression was unreadable. "Yes." "The patrol rotation," he said slowly. "You should have consulted me before offering it." Marcella blinked. "I thought. We don't have the warriors to spare right now." "We do," she said carefully. "I reviewed the current rotation schedules before the meeting. We have capacity." Chayton's jaw tightened. "In the future, run these things by me first." The room went quiet. Marcella felt something twist in her chest. Not anger, not hurt, just confusion. "Of course," she said quietly. Chayton stood and left without another word. Elder Corwin frowned but said nothing. Marcella stayed where she was, staring at the empty doorway. She saw Beatrice Silverdale for the first time that evening. Marcella was walking past the main hall when she heard laughter.
Warm. Light.
The kind that made you want to know what the joke was. She glanced through the open doorway. Chayton was there, and beside him stood a woman Marcella didn't recognize.
Small.
Delicate build. Long auburn hair pulled back in a loose braid. She wore a soft gray dress and had her hand resting lightly on Chayton's arm as she said something that made him smile. Actually smile. Marcella's feet stopped moving. She didn't mean to stare, but she couldn't quite look away. One of the younger pack members noticed her and walked over. "That's Beatrice," the girl said cheerfully. "She just joined the pack last week. Omega from the Southern Territories. Isn't she sweet?" "Yeah," Marcella said distantly.
Sweet.
She kept walking. but something sat heavy in her chest now. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Marcella sat on the edge of her bed and pressed a hand to her sternum. The mate bond was supposed to feel steady,
Warm.
like a thread connecting you to another person. Right now, it felt thin,
Faint.
like a string pulled too tight. She closed her eyes and told herself it was nothing, just stress.
Just a long day.
But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge yet, Marcella knew. Something was wrong. Beatrice Silverdale showed up to the strategy meeting 3 weeks later. Marcella noticed her the moment she walked into the council chamber.
Hard not to.
Beatrice moved like she was afraid of taking up space, her steps small and careful. She wore a pale blue dress that made her look even more delicate than usual. Chayton pulled out a chair for her, right next to his. Marcella kept her face neutral and continued laying out the maps she'd prepared for today's discussion. Border patrol adjustments. Nothing complicated. Just routine optimization based on recent movement patterns from the neighboring packs. Good morning, everyone, Elder Corwin said, settling into a seat. Marcella, you're leading today's briefing? Yes. She straightened and gestured to the map. I've reviewed the last month of patrol reports. There's a gap in coverage along the western ridge between the second and third shifts. I'm recommending we add a half-shift rotation to cover it. One of the younger council members, Marcus, leaned forward. How many wolves would that require?
4.
Rotating weekly so no one's overextended.
Seems reasonable, Marcus said.
Chayton crossed his arms. What about the eastern border? Marcella blinked. The eastern border is covered. We haven't had any incidents there in 6 months. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared. We are prepared, Marcella said carefully. The current rotation is working. The western ridge is the vulnerability. Chayton didn't respond immediately. Then Beatrice spoke. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But didn't we have that issue on the eastern side last year? With the rogues? Marcella turned to look at her. That was 14 months ago. And we adjusted the patrols after that. It hasn't been a problem since.
Oh.
Beatrice's hands folded in her lap. I just thought maybe it's better to be safe, you know? I'd hate for something to happen because we weren't watching carefully enough.
It was such a gentle comment.
So reasonable. And completely irrelevant to the actual data. Marcella opened her mouth to explain why reallocating resources to an area that didn't need them would weaken their actual coverage, but Chayton cut her off. Beatrice has a point, he said. We should consider adding patrols to the east as well. Marcus frowned. We don't have the numbers for both. Then we prioritize the eastern border, Chayton said flatly. Marcella stared at him. Chayton, the data shows. I've made my decision. The room went quiet. Elder Corwin cleared his throat. Perhaps we should review the reports again before finalizing. We'll adjust the eastern patrols, Chayton repeated. Marcella, update the schedules accordingly. She felt something tighten in her throat. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. Of course, she said quietly. The meeting continued, but Marcella barely heard the rest of it. She took notes mechanically, her handwriting sharper than usual. When it ended, everyone filed out. Except Beatrice, who lingered near Chayton, saying something too quiet for Marcella to hear. He smiled at her. Actually smiled. Marcella gathered her maps and left. The first report went missing 2 days later. Marcella had spent hours preparing an updated resource allocation proposal. Grain stores, medical supplies, firewood reserves for winter. She'd left it on the council table the night before, ready for the morning review. When she arrived the next day, it was gone. Elder Corwin, she said, trying to keep her voice even. Did you move the report I left here last night? He looked up from his own stack of documents.
No.
I haven't seen it. Marcella checked the side tables.
The shelves.
Even the floor in case it had been knocked off. Nothing. That's strange, Corwin muttered. Are you sure you left it here? Positive.
Well.
Can you rewrite it? Marcella's jaw tightened.
Yes.
But it'll take most of the day. She rewrote it. 3 days later, another document disappeared. This time, it was a mediation summary for a dispute between 2 families over hunting territory. Marcella had spent a week working with both sides to reach an agreement, and the signed resolution had been filed in the records hall. When she went to retrieve it for follow-up, the file was empty. Just gone. Maybe someone misfiled it, suggested the record's keeper, a nervous young wolf named Eli. Or maybe someone removed it, Marcella said. Eli shifted uncomfortably. I don't know who would do that. Marcella didn't either, but she was starting to have suspicions. Here's something you need to understand about Omega wolves. They're not weak. That's a myth humans came up with because they don't understand pack structure. In a healthy pack, Omegas serve a specific role. They're mediators, peacekeepers, the ones who smooth over conflicts and keep emotional balance. It's why they're often soft-spoken, non-threatening. It makes people trust them. And trust, Marcella was realizing, could be weaponized. She started noticing small things. The way Beatrice always seemed to be nearby when Marcella was discussing something important. The way she'd offered gentle suggestions that contradicted Marcella's plans. The way Chayton listened to her. Really listened. In a way he hadn't listened to Marcella in months. One afternoon, Marcella was mediating a dispute between two hunters who'd both claimed the same elk. Standard territorial disagreement. She'd just finished working out a fair resolution when Beatrice appeared in the doorway. "Oh, I'm sorry," Beatrice said, smiling apologetically. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's fine," Marcella said. "We were just finishing."
Good.
Beatrice stepped inside, glancing at the two hunters. "I heard there was some tension. Is everything all right now?" One of the hunters, a man named Roth, nodded. Marcella worked it out. "That's wonderful." Beatrice's smile widened. "I'm so glad. I was worried this might turn into something bigger." Marcella frowned. "There was never a risk of that." "Oh, I know. I just meant, well, sometimes these things can spiral if they're not handled delicately, you know?" The comment landed like a slap Marcella couldn't quite identify. Because on the surface, it sounded supportive. But underneath, it felt like a question. Had Marcella handled it delicately enough? Roth glanced between them, suddenly uncertain. "Everything's settled," Marcella said firmly. "You're both clear on the terms?" Both hunters nodded and left. Beatrice stayed. "You're really good at this," she said softly. "Thank you. I mean it. You're so capable. I don't know how you manage everything." Marcella studied her. Beatrice's expression was open,
Warm.
completely sincere. And somehow, that made it worse. "I should get back to work," Marcella said. "Of course. I'll see you later." Beatrice left, her footsteps light and unhurried. Marcella stood there alone, staring at the empty doorway. She couldn't explain why the conversation had bothered her, but it had. The public correction happened during a pack-wide assembly. Marcella was presenting updates on winter preparations. Food stores, fuel supplies, emergency protocols. She'd done this every year for the past 5 years. It was routine. "We'll need to increase firewood collection by 20% to account for the extended forecast," she said, gesturing to the chart she'd prepared. "I've already coordinated with the logging teams." Chayton spoke from his seat at the front. 20% seems excessive. Marcella paused. "The weather projections suggest a longer winter than usual. I'd rather overprepare then." "We can't afford to overprepare," Chayton said. "Resources are tight. 15% is sufficient." "Chayton, I've run the numbers. 15% won't. 15%. The assembly had gone quiet. Marcella felt heat rising in her face. Not from anger, from humiliation. She was being corrected in front of the entire pack.
For doing her job.
"Understood," she said quietly. The assembly continued, but Marcella barely registered the rest of it. She kept her posture straight, her face neutral. But inside, something was cracking. Later, as people filed out, she overheard 2 younger wolves talking near the doorway. "She's kind of intense, isn't she?" one of them said. "Who, Marcella?"
Yeah.
"I mean, she's good at her job, but she's so serious all the time." "Maybe that's why Chayton prefers Beatrice. She's warmer, you know?" Marcella's steps faltered. "Do you think Beatrice will be Luna instead?" "I don't know. But honestly, she might be better suited for it." Marcella's kind of cold. They moved out of earshot. Marcella stood frozen in the hallway, her hands clenched at her sides. Cold. That's what they thought of her. Not competent. Not reliable. Cold. She forced herself to keep walking. Back to her quarters. Door closed. Silence. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her palms against her knees, trying to steady her breathing. It wasn't true. She wasn't cold. She was focused. Professional. She'd spent years building the skills this pack needed, and now they thought she was cold. The mate bond pulsed faintly in her chest.
Weak.
Thinner than it had ever been. Marcella closed her eyes. And for the first time, she let herself ask the question she'd been avoiding for weeks. Was this her fault? Had she done something wrong? Was she really too cold to be loved? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, Marcella sat alone and wondered if she'd already lost something she never really had. Marcella started keeping her own copies of everything. Not because she was paranoid, because 3 more documents had gone missing in 2 weeks, and she was tired of rewriting her work. She kept the duplicates in a locked drawer in her quarters. Council proposals, mediation agreements, resource allocations. Everything dated and signed. It felt excessive. But the alternative was watching her work disappear and pretending it was normal. The pattern became obvious once she started tracking it. Every document that went missing was something she'd filed the day before a council meeting. Every dispute that resurfaced was one she'd already resolved. And every time something went wrong, Beatrice was nearby, looking concerned and offering helpful suggestions that somehow made things worse. Marcella needed proof. Real proof. So she started watching. She found the first piece of evidence by accident. It was late evening, and Marcella had returned to the records hall to retrieve a copy of the grain inventory report. The hall was empty. Most wolves were at dinner. She unlocked the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder. The report inside wasn't hers. Same title, same date, but the numbers were different. Marcella's original report had recommended a 15% increase in grain reserves based on projected winter consumption rates. This version recommended 10%. And at the bottom, in handwriting that definitely wasn't hers, was a note, approved by Marcella Thornfield. Her stomach turned. Someone had rewritten her report, signed her name, and filed it as official record. She checked the next folder. Same thing. Then the next. 4 reports. All altered. All with her name attached. Marcella's hands started to shake. Not from fear. From anger. She pulled out every folder she'd filed in the last month and spread them across the table. Some were untouched.
Others had been changed.
Small adjustments. A percentage here. A recommendation there. Just enough to make her look careless. Incompetent.
Wrong.
Then she found the mediation file. The one that had gone missing 2 weeks ago. It was there. But the resolution she'd brokered had been rewritten. The terms were different. Less balanced. Heavily favoring one family over the other. And at the bottom, someone had added a note in delicate handwriting. Concerns raised by Beatrice Silverdale regarding fairness of original terms. Revised accordingly. Marcella stared at the note. Then she started pulling files faster. Beatrice's name appeared in 5 more documents. Always as someone raising concerns. Always resulting in changes that undermined Marcella's work. She gathered everything. Every altered report. Every falsified record. Every piece of evidence that proved someone had been systematically sabotaging her. And then she went to find Chayton. He was in his office, reviewing patrol schedules. Marcella knocked once and stepped inside without waiting for permission. Chayton looked up, frowning. I'm busy. This can't wait. She crossed the room and spread the documents across his desk. 6 files. All marked with changes. All bearing evidence of tampering. What is this? Chayton asked. Someone's been altering my reports, Marcella said, her voice tight. Filing false information under my name. I have the original copies in my quarters. These are forgeries. Chayton picked up one of the files and scanned it. This has your signature. It's not my handwriting. Look closely. He didn't. Just set the file down and leaned back in his chair. Marcella, if you made mistakes in your reports, just say so. Don't blame. I didn't make mistakes. She pointed to another file. This mediation was finalized 2 weeks ago. Both families agreed to the terms. Someone rewrote it and filed a completely different resolution. Why would someone do that? I don't know. But look at the notes. Beatrice's name is on half of these. Chayton's expression changed. Not concern. Not alarm. Irritation. So this is about Beatrice, he said flatly. Marcella blinked.
What? No.
This is about someone tampering with official pack records. And you think Beatrice did it? Her name is literally written in the files, Chayton. She raised concerns that led to changes in. Beatrice doesn't have access to the records hall. Then someone gave it to her. Chayton stood. Or maybe you're looking for someone to blame, because you can't handle the fact that she's better at connecting with people than you are. The words landed like a punch. Marcella stared at him. You think I'm lying? I think you're jealous. She felt the air leave her lungs. Jealous. That's what he thought. Not that she was competent. Not that she'd served this pack for years. Not that she'd brought him actual evidence of fraud. Jealous. Chayton, she said slowly, I have the original documents. I can prove these were altered. I don't need to see your originals. Then look at the handwriting. Look at the dates. Someone forged my signature. Enough.
His voice was sharp now.
Final. I'm not going to entertain conspiracy theories because you don't like that Beatrice has earned the pack's trust. Marcella's throat tightened. This isn't about trust. This is about evidence. You're dismissed, Marcella. She didn't move. Chayton's eyes narrowed. I said you're dismissed. For a long moment, Marcella just stood there, staring at the man she'd spent years trying to stand beside. The man fate had supposedly chosen for her. The man who wouldn't even look at the proof she'd brought him. She gathered the files slowly.
Carefully.
Then she turned and walked out. The bond started unraveling that night. Marcella felt it while she was sitting in her quarters. The altered documents spread across her desk like evidence of a crime no one cared about. It started as a pull, a tightness in her chest. Then it sharpened. Not pain, exactly. More like a tearing, like something was being ripped away from the inside out. She pressed a hand to her sternum and gasped. This wasn't normal. Mate bonds didn't just weaken on their own. They were sacred. Moon-blessed. The moon goddess herself forged them during the lunar ceremonies, linking wolves who balanced each other. Complementary strengths. Complementary weaknesses. A bond could fade if both wolves rejected it. But this felt different. This felt like rejection from only one side. And when a bond broke that way, it didn't just fade. It fractured. Marcella had heard stories about it. Wolves who were rejected by their mates and felt the bond snap like a severed rope. Some recovered. Some didn't. The ones who didn't usually left their packs. Went rogue. Disappeared into the wilderness because staying near the person who'd rejected them was unbearable. She'd never thought it would happen to her. Another pull. She doubled over, gripping the edge of the desk. The bond wasn't gone yet, but it was close. She could feel Chayton on the other end of it. Distant. Detached. Like he'd already let go. And she was the only one still holding on. The next morning, Marcella went back to the records hall. She needed to understand how deep this went, how long Beatrice had been doing this, whether anyone else knew. The hall was empty again. She pulled the files systematically, checking every document she'd filed in the last 3 months. 12 had been altered. 12. All small changes. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make her look unreliable, careless, incompetent. And in 8 of them, Beatrice's name appeared in the revision notes. Marcella was staring at the stack when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Beatrice stood in the doorway, her hands folded in front of her. She wore a soft cream-colored dress, and her expression was calm, sympathetic even. "Marcella," she said gently. "Are you all right?" Marcella straightened. "What are you doing here?" "I was looking for you, actually. Chayton mentioned you were upset about some reports." "I'm not upset. I'm investigating fraud." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Fraud? That's such a strong word." "It's the accurate word." Marcella held up one of the files. "Someone's been changing my reports and filing them under my name. Your name is in half of these revision notes." Beatrice stepped closer, her brow furrowed in concern. "Let me see." Marcella handed her the file. Beatrice scanned it, then looked up, her expression wounded. "Marcella, I didn't change these. I just raised concerns during council discussions. That's what Omegas do. We mediate. We offer perspective. These aren't perspectives. These are alterations. I don't have access to the records hall.
You know that.
Then who does? Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. Actual tears. I can't believe you think I'd do something like this, she said, her voice breaking. I've tried so hard to help, to support you, and now you're accusing me of sabotage. Marcella felt the ground shift under her feet, because Beatrice looked genuinely hurt, and Marcella had no proof that she'd physically altered the documents herself. Just her name in the notes. I'm not accusing you, Marcella said carefully. I'm asking for an explanation. I don't have one. Beatrice's hands trembled as she set the file down. I've only ever tried to do what's best for the pack. If my input led to changes, I didn't know they'd be filed this way. I thought the council was just considering my feedback. It sounded reasonable. It sounded plausible. And that made it worse. Because Marcella couldn't prove intent. Only result. I think you should talk to Chayton, Beatrice said softly. He'll help you sort this out. I already did. And he didn't believe me. Beatrice's face crumpled. Oh, Marcella. I'm so sorry. This must be so hard for you. She reached out like she was going to touch Marcella's arm. Marcella stepped back. Don't. Beatrice's hand dropped. I'm just trying to help. I don't need your help. For just a second, something flickered across Beatrice's face. Not sadness. Not concern. Satisfaction. Then it was gone, replaced by that same gentle, wounded expression. I understand, Beatrice said quietly. I'll leave you alone. She turned and walked out, her steps soft and unhurried. Marcella stood there, surrounded by files that proved she'd been sabotaged and couldn't prove who did it. She gathered everything, locked it in her quarters, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing. The realization came slowly. Not all at once. Not like a revelation. Just a quiet, creeping understanding that settled into her bones. Chayton had already chosen. Not recently. Not because of the reports or the arguments or the evidence she'd brought him. He'd chosen weeks ago. Maybe months. Maybe the moment Beatrice walked into the pack. And Marcella had been so focused on being useful, on being loyal, on proving her worth, that she hadn't seen it. She pressed a hand to her chest. The bond was barely a thread now.
Thin.
Fragile. Fading. And for the first time, Marcella let herself think the thought she'd been avoiding. He was never going to choose her. Not because she wasn't good enough. Not because she was cold or incompetent or wrong. But because he'd already decided she didn't matter. And all the evidence in the world wouldn't change that. She sat there in the silence of her quarters, the weight of that truth pressing down on her. Outside, the pack continued as it always had. Inside, something in Marcella Thornfield finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a bond that had been holding on too long. Finally letting go. The winter assembly was held on the coldest night of the year. It was tradition. Every pack in the Northern Territories gathered their wolves under the full moon to mark the solstice. Bonds were acknowledged. Ranks were confirmed. The year's losses were honored, and the year ahead was blessed. Marcella had attended every assembly since she was 16. But this was the first time she'd worn white. The ceremonial dress had been delivered to her quarters 3 days ago. Heavy wool, lined with fur at the collar and cuffs. Embroidered with silver thread and patterns that represented the moon goddess's favor. It was the dress worn by wolves being formally recognized as Luna. She hadn't asked for it, but it had arrived anyway, along with a note from Elder Corwin. The pack expects this. Be ready. So she'd put it on. Now she stood in the ceremonial clearing, snow falling in silent sheets around her, and wondered if she'd made a mistake. The clearing had been prepared for hours. Torches ringed the perimeter, their flames casting orange light across the snow. The pack gathered in a semicircle, warriors and elders in front, younger wolves behind. Everyone dressed in their formal winter attire. Chayton stood at the center. He wore the Alpha's cloak. Thick black fur over his shoulders, clasped with a Thornfield insignia. He looked every bit the leader he was supposed to be.
Strong.
Commanding. Untouchable. And beside him stood Beatrice. She wore pale blue. Not white. Not the Luna color, but she was there, right next to him. Marcella's stomach twisted. Elder Corwin stepped forward, his breath misting in the cold air. We gather under the full moon to honor the bonds the goddess has woven and the strength she has granted us. The pack murmured their agreement. Corwin continued. Tonight, we acknowledge those who will lead us into the next year. Our Alpha, Chayton's Strongheart. Chayton inclined his head. Corwin turned toward Marcella. And his Luna, Marcella Thornfield, bound to him by the goddess's will. The words hung in the air. Marcella felt every eye on her. She stepped forward. This was it. The formal acknowledgement. The moment the pack would recognize her as Chayton's mate. As their Luna. Years of work. Years of loyalty. Years of silence. All of it leading to this. Chayton didn't look at her. He looked at Corwin. I can't accept this bond. The clearing went silent. Not the comfortable silence of anticipation. The sharp, breathless silence of shock. Marcella's feet stopped moving. Corwin blinked.
What?
Chayton's voice was steady,
Come.
like he was delivering a routine report. The bond between Marcella Thornfield and myself is not one I can honor. Marcella heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Not here. Not now. Not in front of the entire pack. Chayton, Corwin said carefully, this is highly irregular. The bond was acknowledged 2 years ago. You can't simply. I reject it. 3 words. Final. Absolute. Marcella felt the ground tilt under her feet. Not literally, but it felt like it. Someone gasped. Then Chayton turned. Not to her. To Beatrice. He extended his hand. Beatrice took it, her fingers slipping into his like they'd always belonged there. I choose Beatrice Silverdale, Chayton said. The whispers started immediately.
Low. Confused.
Scandalized. Because this wasn't just breaking a bond. This was rejecting a Luna in front of the pack during a sacred ceremony. It didn't happen. Ever. Here's what you need to understand about public bond rejections. They're not just personal. They're political. A Luna isn't just the Alpha's mate. She's a symbol of the pack's stability. Rejecting her publicly is rejecting the structure itself. It signals instability, weakness. It invites challenge. But Chayton didn't seem to care. He stood there, holding Beatrice's hand, while the pack stared. Marcella couldn't move.
Couldn't speak.
Couldn't breathe. Elder Corwin looked between them, his face pale. Chayton, you need to reconsider. This isn't. My decision is made. Corwin's mouth opened.
Closed.
He looked at Marcella. She still hadn't moved. One of the younger wolves whispered something Marcella couldn't hear. Another responded. The whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass. Marcella's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, nails biting into her palms. Focus.
Don't break.
Not here. Not in front of them. She forced herself to take a breath. Then another. Then she looked at Chayton. Really looked at him. His face was blank. Not cruel. Not conflicted. Just decided. Like this had been inevitable all along. And maybe it had been.
Marcella heard herself speak.
Her voice sounded distant. Detached. Was I ever your choice? The question cut through the whispers. Everyone went quiet again. Chayton met her gaze. For a moment, she thought he might answer. He didn't. Just stood there, silent. And in that silence, Marcella understood.
No.
She had never been his choice. Not when the bond formed. Not when she worked herself to exhaustion for the pack. Not when she brought him evidence of fraud. Never. The bond snapped. She felt it break. Not like pain. Not like the slow unraveling she'd felt over the past weeks. This was instant. Complete. One moment, there was a thread connecting them. The next, there was nothing. Just emptiness. A hollow space in her chest where something had been. Marcella swayed slightly. Someone reached toward her. One of the elders. She didn't see who. She stepped back. Her hands moved on their own, reaching for the ceremonial band around her left wrist. It was silver, etched with a Thornfield mark. The symbol of a recognized Luna. She'd put it on that morning with shaking hands, wondering if she deserved it. Now she knew. She didn't. Not because she wasn't worthy, but because Chayton had never intended to honor it. Marcella unfastened the clasp. The band slipped free. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she let it fall. It hit the snow without a sound, silver against white, already half buried. The pack stared. No one spoke. No one moved. Marcella turned. Not to Chayton. Not to Beatrice. Just away. And she started walking. Her boots crunched through the snow, each step deliberate. She didn't run. Didn't stumble. Just walked. Past the torches. Past the gathered wolves, who parted silently to let her through. Past the boundary of the ceremonial grounds. Into the trees. Behind her, someone called her name. She didn't stop. The forest swallowed her quickly. The sounds of the assembly faded. The torchlight disappeared. Just snow and darkness and the steady rhythm of her own footsteps. She walked until she couldn't see the clearing anymore. Until the only light came from the moon overhead, pale and indifferent. Then she stopped, pressed her back against a tree, and finally let herself feel it. Not the bond breaking. That had already happened, but the weight of what it meant. She had given Chayton everything. Her loyalty, her confidence, her time, her heart. And he had stood in front of the entire pack and chosen someone else. Marcella tilted her head back against the rough bark, staring up at the branches overhead. Snow caught in her hair, on her shoulders, on the white dress that suddenly felt like a costume she'd been asked to wear for a role she'd never actually had. She should cry. That's what people did when their hearts broke, right? But the tears didn't come. Just cold. And clarity. She'd spent years trying to prove she was enough for someone who had never wanted her.
And now?
Now she was free. The thought felt strange. Wrong even. But also true. Marcella pushed off the tree and kept walking. She didn't know where she was going. Just away. Away from the pack that had watched her humiliation. Away from the man who had rejected her. Away from the life she'd built that had never actually been hers. The snow fell harder now, thick and relentless. The wind picked up, cutting through the ceremonial dress like it was nothing. Marcella's fingers were going numb. She should turn back, find shelter, survive. But she kept walking, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. So she walked. Hours passed. Maybe more. Marcella had lost track. The forest was unfamiliar now. She'd gone farther than she'd ever been on patrol routes, deeper into territory that belonged to no pack. The cold was sharper here, meaner. Her legs were shaking, not from emotion, from exhaustion. She needed to stop, just for a minute, just to catch her breath. Marcella sank down against a fallen log, pulling her knees to her chest. The dress was soaked through now. Her hair plastered to her face. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. This was stupid. Walking into a blizzard with no plan, no supplies, no destination. But she couldn't go back. Not after that. Not after everyone had seen her stand there, wearing white, while Chayton chose someone else. Marcella closed her eyes. The wind howled around her. She should shift. Her wolf form would handle the cold better. But shifting required energy she didn't have. So she just sat there, waiting for the cold to win, waiting for the numbness to spread from her fingers to the rest of her, waiting for the choice to be taken out of her hands. Then she felt it, a presence, not close, but there, watching. Marcella's eyes opened. Through the snow, barely visible in the darkness, stood a figure, massive, still, silent, not a wolf,
A man.
but something about him felt wrong. Too big,
Too calm.
too present in a way that made the air itself seem heavier.
He didn't speak. Just stood there.
Waiting, Marcella tried to stand. Her legs gave out. She hit the snow hard, gasping as the cold bit into her palms. The figure moved then, closer, through the storm. She could see him more clearly now.
Tall.
Broad-shouldered, wearing dark armor that looked like it had been forged for war, not ceremony. His face was shadowed, but his eyes caught the moonlight. Gold. Not brown. Not amber. Gold. Alpha eyes. But not like Chayton's. These were older, stronger, unyielding.
Marcella tried to speak.
Her voice came out as a rasp. Who? You survived the storm. His voice was low, steady, like stone. Marcella blinked snow out of her eyes. Barely. Most don't. He crouched in front of her, studying her face. Not with pity, not with concern, with recognition, like he saw something she didn't know was there. Can you walk? He asked. I don't know. Then I'll carry you. Before she could protest, he slipped one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. Marcella should have fought, should have demanded answers, should have done something other than let a stranger carry her through a blizzard. But she was so tired, and he was warm, and for the first time in hours, she didn't feel like she was dying. So she let her head rest against his chest and closed her eyes. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was his voice, quiet and certain. You don't belong where you were. Marcella woke to warmth. Not the comfortable warmth of her quarters back in the pack. This was different, immediate, the kind that comes from fire and shelter and being pulled back from the edge of freezing to death. She opened her eyes slowly. A ceiling, wood beams, firelight dancing across stone walls. She was inside.
Alive.
The memory came back in fragments. The assembly, the rejection, walking into the storm,
Collapsing.
and then the stranger. Marcella sat up too fast. Her head spun. She pressed a hand to her temple, waiting for the dizziness to pass. She was on a low bed, covered with heavy furs. Someone had removed her ceremonial dress and replaced it with a simple wool tunic and pants.
Dry. Warm.
Not hers. Her heart started racing. Where was she? Who had? You're awake. The voice came from across the room. Marcella turned. He sat in a chair near the fire, one leg crossed over the other, completely at ease. The stranger from the forest. Only now she could actually see him. Tall, even sitting. Broad through the shoulders. Dark hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. His face was angular, all sharp lines and controlled power. And his eyes. Gold. Pure gold, like molten metal. Alpha eyes. But not just any alpha. There was something older in that gaze. Something that made every instinct in Marcella's body go still. This wasn't a pack alpha. This was something more. Where am I? She asked, her voice rough from the cold. My territory, he said simply. And you are? Donovan Ironwood. The name hit her like a physical blow. Ironwood, the Alpha King. Marcella stared at him. Stories about Donovan Ironwood had circulated through the Northern Territories for years. He didn't just lead a pack. He commanded an alliance of packs, territories that spanned from the northern mountains to the eastern coast. Wolves answered to him not out of fear, but out of respect. He was a legend, and she was sitting in his home, wearing his clothes, because she'd been stupid enough to walk into a blizzard. I should go, Marcella said, starting to stand. You can't. She froze. Excuse me? The storm hasn't stopped. Donovan gestured toward the window. Snow pelted the glass in thick sheets. You won't make it 100 yards. Marcella looked at the window, then back at him. I can't stay here. Why not? Because I don't belong here. Donovan studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossing the room with the kind of controlled grace that came from absolute confidence in his own strength. He stopped a few feet away. You survived a blizzard in ceremonial dress with no supplies, he said. You walked miles into unclaimed territory. And when I found you, you were still conscious. Marcella frowned. So most wolves would have died in the first hour. She didn't know what to say to that. Donovan tilted his head slightly. You're stronger than you think. I'm not strong. I'm just, she stopped. What was she? Desperate? Broken? Running from the worst night of her life? All of the above. Donovan didn't push. Just waited. Marcella sank back onto the bed, exhaustion pulling at her again. I need to leave. I can't be here. Where will you go? I don't know. Anywhere. Back to your pack. The words landed like a slap. Marcella's hands clenched into fists.
No.
Then you'll stay until the storm clears. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an order either. Just a statement of fact. Marcella looked up at him, searching his face for pity, for judgment, for the same dismissiveness she'd seen in Chayton's eyes for months. She didn't find any of it. Donovan looked at her like she was a wolf who'd survived something brutal and come out the other side. Not broken, just different. Fine, she said quietly. Until the storm clears. He nodded once and returned to his chair. Marcella pulled the furs tighter around herself and stared into the fire. The storm didn't clear for 3 days. Marcella spent most of that time alone. Donovan's home was large, but sparsely populated. She'd seen a few other wolves in passing, guards, advisors, a cook who left meals outside her door without saying a word. No one asked questions. No one stared. It was a strange kind of anonymity, the exact opposite of pack life, where everyone knew everyone's business. Here, she was just another wolf. And for the first time in years, that felt like a relief. On the second night, Marcella couldn't sleep. The rejection kept replaying in her mind. Chayton's voice. The silence when she'd asked if she'd ever been his choice. The bond snapping. She pressed a hand to her chest. It still felt hollow there. Empty. Like a piece of her had been carved out and thrown away. She needed air. Marcella slipped out of her room and made her way through the quiet halls. The house was built from stone and timber, solid and ancient. It smelled like wood smoke and pine and something else. Something that felt like permanence. She found a side door and stepped outside. The storm had eased slightly. Snow still fell, but softer now. The courtyard was empty, covered in a thick blanket of white. Marcella walked to the center and stopped, tilting her face toward the sky. The moon was hidden behind clouds. But she could feel it, the pull, the goddess's presence, faint but steady. Here's something most wolves don't talk about. The moon goddess doesn't speak to you directly. She doesn't send signs or omens or divine messages. But she does leave traces. Moments where you feel something click into place. Where the world feels aligned. Even if just for a second. Marcella had felt it the night her bond with Chayton formed. She'd thought it meant something. Now she realized it had. Just not what she'd believed. The bond hadn't been a gift. It had been a test. And she'd failed. Or maybe Chayton had. She didn't know anymore. Marcella closed her eyes and let the snow fall on her face. Then she felt it. A shift. Not in the air. Not in the temperature. In her. Her wolf stirred. Not the way it usually did, slow and steady. This was abrupt. Demanding. Marcella's eyes snapped open.
No.
Not here. Not now. But her wolf didn't care. The shift came fast. Too fast to control. Bones cracked. Skin stretched. Pain flared through her body as her form changed. Marcella hit the ground on all fours, gasping. Then the pain stopped. She stood slowly, shaking snow from her fur, and realized something was wrong.
No.
Not wrong. Different. Her wolf had always been strong. Lean and fast, built for endurance. But this was something else. Marcella looked down at her paws. They were larger, broader. Her coat was thicker, the color deeper. Silver white with streaks of black she'd never had before. And the aura. She could feel it radiating from her like heat. Not aggressive. Not wild. Ancient. Like her wolf had always been there, dormant, waiting for something to wake it up. Interesting. Marcella's head snapped up. Donovan stood at the edge of the courtyard, arms crossed, watching her. He wasn't surprised, wasn't alarmed, just observing. Marcella shifted back, the transformation smoother this time. She stood there in human form, breathing hard, her clothes somehow intact. That was one of the perks of being a werewolf. Your clothes shifted with you if you learned control. Most young wolves shredded their outfits for years before mastering it. What just happened? She asked. Your wolf woke up, Donovan said simply. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Marcella's hands were shaking. Not from cold. From adrenaline. From the feeling of something inside her that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. Maybe she just hadn't noticed. Some wolves carry dormant bloodlines, Donovan said, stepping closer. Ancient lineages that don't activate until certain conditions are met. What conditions? Trauma, rejection, survival. Marcella stared at him. You're saying I have an ancient bloodline? I'm saying your wolf just showed me something most wolves don't carry, which is power. The word hung in the air between them. Marcella wanted to argue, to say he was wrong, that she wasn't powerful, that she was just a logistics coordinator who'd been publicly rejected and had run away like a coward. But she couldn't, because she'd felt it. That shift. That presence. Her wolf wasn't the same anymore. And neither was she. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. Marcella stood at the window of her room, watching the clouds clear. The sun cut through the gray, pale and cold but present.
She could leave now.
Should leave. But she didn't move. Because the truth was, she had no idea where to go. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she said. Donovan entered, carrying a folded set of clothes. Travel gear. Sturdy and practical. "The roads are clear," he said, setting them on the bed. "If you want to leave, you can." Marcella looked at the clothes, then at him. "And if I don't, then you stay." "Why would you let me stay?" Donovan met her gaze. Those gold eyes steady and unflinching. "Because you don't belong where you were." There it was again, that certainty. Like he could see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "I don't understand," Marcella said quietly. "You will." He turned to leave. "Donovan." He stopped, glancing back. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "Because when I found you in that storm, you weren't begging to be saved. You were still standing." He left before she could respond. Marcella stood there, staring at the door, still standing.
Was she?
She didn't feel like it. She felt shattered.
Lost.
Like every foundation she'd built her life on had been ripped away. But she was here, alive, breathing. And maybe that was enough. Marcella looked at the travel clothes on the bed, then at the window, then at the door Donovan had just walked through. She had a choice to make. Run again.
Or stay.
And for the first time in her life, Marcella Thornfield didn't know which one scared her more. Marcella decided to stay. Not forever. Not permanently. Just long enough to figure out what came next. That's what she told herself. But 3 weeks turned into a month. Then 2. And somewhere in that time, she stopped thinking about leaving. Because Donovan's territory wasn't like the Thornfield pack. It was better. The first thing she noticed was the structure. Not rigid hierarchy that existed in every pack, but the way decisions were made. Donovan didn't rule through dominance alone. He listened, considered, then acted. And when he acted, people followed. Not because they had to, because they trusted him. Marcella watched it happen during her second week there. A dispute had broken out between 2 families over water access. Both claimed rights to a spring that fed into the northern farmlands. It was the kind of conflict that could spiral if handled wrong. Donovan called a meeting. He sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, and let both families present their cases. No interruptions. No dismissals. Just listening. When they finished, he asked questions. Not accusations. Questions. How long has your family used the spring? What alternate sources are available? If you shared access, what schedule would work? By the end of the meeting, both families had agreed to a rotation system. No yelling, no posturing, no undermining, just leadership. Marcella had sat in the back of the room, observing, and realized something. This was what she'd tried to build in the Thornfield pack. But Chayton had never let her. The first time Donovan asked her opinion, Marcella almost didn't answer. It was during a council session. Routine logistics review. Supply chain management for the Eastern settlements. One of Donovan's advisors, a sharp-eyed woman named Kira, was presenting an updated distribution model. It was solid, efficient, but there was a gap. Marcella saw it immediately. A bottleneck in the midpoint transfer station that would slow everything down during winter. She opened her mouth, then stopped. No one had asked for her input. She wasn't part of this council. She was just a guest who'd stayed too long. Marcella. She looked up. Donovan was watching her. You have something to say. It wasn't a question. Marcella hesitated. I don't want to overstep. You're not. She glanced at Kira, who nodded. I'd like to hear it. So Marcella spoke. The midpoint station won't handle the volume during winter, she said carefully. The roads freeze. Transport slows. You'll have supplies stacking up with no way to move them forward. Kira frowned, looking at her charts. We increased storage capacity last year. Storage isn't the issue. Transit is. You need either a secondary route or a relay system to keep things moving when the main road is impassable. Silence. Then Donovan leaned forward. What would you recommend? Marcella pulled the map toward her. A relay station here. She pointed to a spot halfway between the midpoint and the eastern settlements. Small. Just enough to hold 1 day's worth of supplies. That way, if the main road closes, you can still move goods in smaller increments using the southern pass.
Kira studied the map.
Then she looked at Donovan. That would work. Donovan nodded. Implement it.
Just like that.
No dismissal. No contradiction. No suggestion that someone else should handle it. Just acknowledgement. Marcella sat back, heart pounding. Kira smiled at her. Good catch. Thanks. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. After that, Donovan started including her in more discussions. Not as a guest, as a participant. Marcella found herself sitting in on council sessions, offering input on resource management, mediation strategies, territorial agreements. Things she'd done for years in the Thornfield Pack, but had been slowly excluded from. Here, people listened. They didn't always agree. Kira challenged her on supply routes. Donovan's head of security, a gruff wolf named Marcus, questioned her risk assessments. But they listened, and when her ideas worked, they said so. One afternoon, Marcella was reviewing grain projections when Donovan walked into the archives room where she'd been working. You're good at this, he said. She looked up from the ledger. At what? Seeing the problems no one else notices. Marcella shrugged. It's just logistics. It's more than that. Donovan leaned against the table. You think 3 steps ahead. Most wolves react to problems. You prevent them. She didn't know what to say to that. Donovan studied her for a moment. Why did you stay? The question caught her off guard. What? You could have left weeks ago. The storm cleared. You're healed. Why are you still here? Marcella set down her pen. I don't know. Yes, you do. She looked at him, those gold eyes steady and patient. Because it feels different here, she said quietly. People don't. They don't treat me like I'm in the way. You were never in the way, Donovan said. You were just with wolves who didn't know what to do with competence. Marcella's throat tightened. She'd spent years believing the problem was her, that she was too cold, too focused, too much. But what if the problem had never been her at all?
What if it had been them? Thank you, she said.
Donovan nodded once and left. Marcella sat there alone, staring at the ledger. And for the first time in months, the hollow space in her chest felt a little less empty. The council vote happened 6 weeks after she arrived. Donovan called a formal session. Full attendance. Elders, advisors, heads of the allied packs. Marcella wasn't sure why she'd been summoned until she walked into the chamber and saw the setup. A seat at the table. Not in the back. Not along the wall. At the table. She stopped in the doorway. Kira gestured toward the empty chair. That's yours. What? Sit down, Marcella. We're starting. She sat. Donovan entered a moment later, taking his place at the head of the table. We're here to discuss the Northern Alliance Treaty. 3 packs have requested formal inclusion. Marcella has reviewed the terms. She'll present.
Wait. What?
Marcella's heart jumped into her throat. I didn't prepare a presentation. You reviewed the documents last week, Donovan said calmly. You flagged concerns. Present them. She stared at him. He didn't look concerned. Didn't look like he was testing her. Just waited. Marcella took a breath. Then she started talking. The treaty terms are fair on the surface, she said, pulling the documents toward her. But there's a clause in Section 4 that's problematic. It allows any allied pack to request military support without specifying response time or resource limits. Marcella decided to stay. Not forever. Not permanently. Just long enough to figure out what came next. That's what she told herself. But 3 weeks turned into a month. Then 2. And somewhere in that time, she stopped thinking about leaving. Because Donovan's territory wasn't like the Thornfield Pack. It was better. The first thing she noticed was the structure. Not rigid hierarchy that existed in every pack, but the way decisions were made. Donovan didn't rule through dominance alone. He listened, considered, then acted. And when he acted, people followed. Not because they had to, because they trusted him. Marcella watched it happen during her second week there. A dispute had broken out between two families over water access. Both claimed rights to a spring that fed into the northern farmlands. It was the kind of conflict that could spiral if handled wrong. Donovan called a meeting. He sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, and let both families present their cases. No interruptions. No dismissals. Just listening. When they finished, he asked questions. Not accusations. Questions. How long has your family used the spring? What alternate sources are available? If you shared access, what schedule would work? By the end of the meeting, both families had agreed to a rotation system. No yelling. No posturing. No undermining. Just leadership. Marcella had sat in the back of the room, observing, and realized something. This was what she'd tried to build in the Thornfield Pack. But Chayton had never let her. The first time Donovan asked her opinion, Marcella almost didn't answer. It was during a council session. Routine logistics review. Supply chain management for the Eastern settlements. One of Donovan's advisors, a sharp-eyed woman named Kira, was presenting an updated distribution model. It was solid, efficient, but there was a gap. Marcella saw it immediately. A bottleneck in the midpoint transfer station that would slow everything down during winter. She opened her mouth, then stopped. No one had asked for her input. She wasn't part of this council. She was just a guest who'd stayed too long. Marcella. She looked up. Donovan was watching her. You have something to say. It wasn't a question. Marcella hesitated. I don't want to overstep. You're not. She glanced at Kira, who nodded. I'd like to hear it. So Marcella spoke. The midpoint station won't handle the volume during winter, she said carefully. The roads freeze. Transport slows. You'll have supplies stacking up with no way to move them forward. Kira frowned, looking at her charts. We increased storage capacity last year. Storage isn't the issue. Transit is. You need either a secondary route or a relay system to keep things moving when the main road is impassable. Silence. Then Donovan leaned forward. What would you recommend? Marcella pulled the map toward her. A relay station here. She pointed to a spot halfway between the midpoint and the eastern settlements. Small. Just enough to hold one day's worth of supplies. That way, if the main road closes, you can still move goods in smaller increments using the southern pass.
Kira studied the map.
Then she looked at Donovan. That would work. Donovan nodded. Implement it.
Just like that.
No dismissal. No contradiction. No suggestion that someone else should handle it. Just acknowledgement. Marcella sat back, heart pounding. Kira smiled at her. Good catch. Thanks. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. After that, Donovan started including her in more discussions. Not as a guest, as a participant. Marcella found herself sitting in on council sessions, offering input on resource management, mediation strategies, territorial agreements. Things she'd done for years in the Thornfield Pack, but had been slowly excluded from. Here, people listened. They didn't always agree. Kira challenged her on supply routes. Donovan's head of security, a gruff wolf named Marcus, questioned her risk assessments. But they listened. And when her ideas worked, they said so. One afternoon, Marcella was reviewing grain projections when Donovan walked into the archives room where she'd been working. You're good at this, he said. She looked up from the ledger. At what? Seeing the problems no one else notices. Marcella shrugged. It's just logistics. It's more than that. Donovan leaned against the table. You think 3 steps ahead. Most wolves react to problems. You prevent them. She didn't know what to say to that. Donovan studied her for a moment. Why did you stay? The question caught her off guard. What? You could have left weeks ago. The storm cleared. You're healed. Why are you still here? Marcella set down her pen. I don't know. Yes, you do. She looked at him, those gold eyes steady and patient. Because it feels different here, she said quietly. People don't. They don't treat me like I'm in the way. You were never in the way, Donovan said. You were just with wolves who didn't know what to do with competence. Marcella's throat tightened. She'd spent years believing the problem was her, that she was too cold, too focused, Too much. But what if the problem had never been her at all?
What if it had been them? Thank you, she said.
Donovan nodded once and left. Marcella sat there alone, staring at the ledger. And for the first time in months, the hollow space in her chest felt a little less empty. The council vote happened 6 weeks after she arrived. Donovan called a formal session. Full attendance. Elders, advisors, heads of the allied packs. Marcella wasn't sure why she'd been summoned until she walked into the chamber and saw the setup. A seat at the table. Not in the back. Not along the wall. At the table. She stopped in the doorway. Kira gestured toward the empty chair. That's yours. What? Sit down, Marcella. We're starting. She sat. Donovan entered a moment later, taking his place at the head of the table. We're here to discuss the Northern Alliance Treaty. 3 packs have requested formal inclusion. Marcella has reviewed the terms. She'll present.
Wait, what?
Marcella's heart jumped into her throat. I didn't prepare a presentation. You reviewed the documents last week, Donovan said calmly. You flagged concerns. Present them. She stared at him. He didn't look concerned. Didn't look like he was testing her. Just waited. Marcella took a breath. Then she started talking. The treaty terms are fair on the surface, she said, pulling the documents toward her. But there's a clause in Section 4 that's problematic. It allows any allied pack to request military support without specifying response time or resource limits.
So that's where Marcella's journey took her, from the woman no one saw to the Luna everyone underestimated. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know. What would you have done in Marcella's position? Stayed and fought, or walked away like she did? Drop your thoughts below. I actually read them. And if you want more stories about wolves who don't break when they're tested, about loyalty that has limits, and power that's earned, not given, there's a whole library of them here. Stick around. The next one might hit even harder. Until then, remember this. You're not too much. You're just with people who can't handle you. Find better wolves.